The internal audit is your opportunity to stop the clocks and review the way that you're managing data protection. So if we come to our black navigation pane and click on Internal Audit, you'll see it's broken down into 3 parts. The individual questions are completed by everybody within the school, and then the data mapping review and school questions are completed by the data protection leads or the DPO. Now, this part of your portal is actually locked, and so to unlock it, we click on the internal audit settings. In the overview, the first thing you can see is that you don't have to have all 3 parts of the internal audit running concurrently. So, for example, you may wish to have the personal questions set to be completed in September as part of Inset, but you may not wish to review your policies and procedures, which come under this part of the audit, until maybe January. And the whole point of this system is that you can pick and choose and make decisions that work best for your school or your MAT. Now, if you're not ready to begin an audit today, you can ask the portal to send you an email in the future reminding you to come in and create an audit. It's very nice and simple. We just click on Set Reminder. We pop a description in. So in this case, I'm going to call it Supplier Review Spring 2020. And then I just set my reminder date. Now this can be at any point in the next 12 months. And I'm going to ask it just to remind me in early April. So on the 5th of April, I will get an email inviting me to pop in and to create my audit. So let me show you then how you would do that. Now, when you're ready then, you click on Start, and this will immediately open your audit to begin today. Now, as you can see, a new pop-up has appeared. Again, I write a little description. So I'm just going to type Whole School Review, Spring 2020. And then I choose my end date. Now, this can be at any time within 12 weeks of my start date. And roughly, we estimate about 6 weeks to do the school questions. So I'm going to put this in mid-April. And I click on OK. As soon as I've clicked on OK, if I take you back to the navigation pane for a sec and we go into the internal audit, you can see now that that part has opened for me. So I'm going to take you back into the settings then. A couple more bits and pieces to show you. Now, once my audit is up and running, I can change the end date by clicking on Edit. And I can move that to any day within the 12 weeks of the start date. So here it was due to end on the 12th of the 4th. I'm actually going to extend that. And we're going to put it at the end of April. But now it's requiring me to put a little sentence, a little comment as to why I'm making that change. So this is just your log of all of the decisions that you're making, basically. So I'm just going to pop in here, snow days led to the audit not being completed. So I'm just giving a reason as to why I've had to extend it here. And I click on OK. And you can see that is now reflected in the end date just there. Now, let's imagine a few weeks have passed. I've now completed my audit. So I then come back into this settings page in order to lock that audit. Now, this ends it and it stops me from being able to make any further changes to my responses. So I just click on Lock. Yes, I do want to lock it. So I click on Yes. You can now see that having locked it, I then have the option to close the audit. And this is really, if you like, it's the final dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's. And it's usually completed by your DPO. So let's imagine then I am the DPO. I can close this audit. And it invites me to pop in a little comment. Now, this might be a summative comment. It might be a target. So I'm just going to pop in here in this little mock-up one. I'm going to put acceptable use policy needs to be amended. And I can ask myself to have a little reminder here. So I can set that at any time within the next 12 months. Or I can also put a little reminder note to myself. So give this task to DP lead. I'm just making my life a little bit easier so that when I come back in, I can remind myself why I've set this up again. Okay, click on yes. Right, so what we're now going to do is take a look at the completed tab. And here I've got listed all of the audits that have either been completed or that are in progress. And to get a bit more of a detailed view, if I just click the little triangle here, that gives me a breakdown of all the different sections of that particular part of the audit and how many questions are being expected to be answered, and how many I have actually answered to date. Now, obviously, I've only just set this one up, hence why there's nothing answered there. Okay, so I'm going to talk you through the internal audit, and we're going to look at each of the 3 sections. And we're going to start by looking at these individual questions. And these are completed by all general and DP staff level. Now you can see it's divided into 2 sections. And the first part is a set of 12 questions that truly aren't designed to be rocket science, and they should take about 5 or 10 minutes to complete. Now these questions are regarding day-to-day practice, and really you need to get staff to view these as a bit of a checklist of good practice. And certainly at this stage, they need to be really honest. Okay, you need to know what things they are doing, but also what they aren't, so that you can provide some further training. Now, in terms of the format of these questions, you have a question, and then you have a prompt. So if I hover over the little icon here, this just gives a bit more detail as to what the question is asking of the member of staff. We then have a drop-down multiple choice. Now, for this first section, the 12 day-to-day questions, there really isn't any expectation that staff are going to add in any free text. So they can answer yes, no, or partly, that's fine. But if they do want to add some evidence or a little statement, they can just do that by clicking on this little triangle here, and that provides them with a free text box. So let's take a look at some of these questions. We've got things like, do you keep your password secure? Do you dispose of confidential paper? And these are things you'd expect to see in an audit of data protection, obviously. And we've got a good one here that people don't really think about, and it says, do you position computer screens away from windows? So it's little things like this that you hope your general staff are going to start to think about and start to embed. So they complete these 12 questions. As I said, it shouldn't take too long. Once they're happy with their answers, they can either save as current progress, which will enable them to come back in and edit if they need to, or if they're happy with their answers, they just save as completed. Once they've done that, they come back to the navigation pane and to the second little hyperlink here. And this one's all about training. So in this part, they do now have to list the training that they've had in the last couple of years. So they click on, yes, they've had some training. And then in the free text, they jot down what that actually entailed. So as a minimum, you'd expect them to be writing down that they've read the school or the MAT data protection policy or privacy policy. Perhaps they've watched some of our role-based training videos. They may have attended a GDPR seminar. Anything at all that relates to data protection can be popped into that box. And then you get my favourite question, which is, you did the training, did you understand it? And fingers crossed, they are going to say yes. And same again, if they're happy, but they want to edit it, they save as current progress. If they're happy, they don't want to edit, they save as completed. So having had a look at the individual questions, we're now going to turn our attention to the work that's undertaken by the data protection staff. And we're going to start by the data mapping review to begin with. And this relates to your suppliers. So if I click on Start, what's going to happen is it's going to generate a list of all of the suppliers and products that I've subscribed to. And what we have to do for each of these products and each of these suppliers is to click Begin Review. And the first thing I see then is the data map. Now, you will have looked at this, obviously, when you subscribed to the product, But just to remind you, the portal shows you the data for this particular supplier and this particular product. And it shows us the reason they're taking it, what legal grounds, from where they're taking the information. We've also got information about the controller and processor, types of sensitivity, and how the various data subjects' rights are being upheld. And lastly, you've got information about sharing and the hosting of this data. So as I said, you've had a good chance to review this when you subscribed to the supplier and the product. And we've talked about that in an earlier video that's called suppliers. So having had a little look at that, we can then click on next. And this is showing us the contact details for this particular supplier. So at the very least, we should be seeing a legal address and either an email or a telephone number for the company. And over here, this is the supplier's compliance documentation. And just to explain, as we are approached by schools to add more suppliers to the database, we do investigate very thoroughly their compliance. But actually, you may not be aware, as yet, the ICO hasn't actually said what it means to be compliant. So as a company, we've made the decision that provided within their documentation somewhere, it's stating what information they're taking from schools, why they're taking it, where they're storing it, and whether they're sharing it, we are regarding that as being compliant. Okay. Now, legally, however, no one other than the person responsible for data protection within your school or MAT can say that it's okay to share data with anyone. Okay. It's a risk to work with any supplier. And if you're satisfied you want to continue to work with this particular supplier, you would click accept. However, if you are not going to accept them at this stage, perhaps you may have a query about how they're handling your data or anything like Brexit, for example, you can pop a little note to yourself in here and then send us an email, and we will then approach the supplier to get that answer for you, because that's what we're here for. There's also something we ask our suppliers to do on this page, and that's to undertake a series of questions about their compliance. And you can see we're looking at parent pays page here, and they have answered a lot of these questions. Now, you will find some suppliers haven't, because as far as they're concerned, they have covered these questions within their compliance documentation. And that's absolutely fine. Provided it's somewhere, we're happy with that. And clicking accept takes us back to that list of suppliers and products. And it's just a question then of working your way through each, taking a look at the compliance documentation and clicking accept, or putting a little note if you don't accept. Now, just to explain, although we have thoroughly checked the compliance, as I said, we legally cannot accept this on your behalf. It must be the DP lead or the DPO that undertakes this part for you. So what we're going to move on to next then is to look at these school questions. And this is all to do with thinking about how you are managing data protection. So it's asking you to review your policies, your infrastructure, it's things like that. And it's broken down into 6 sections. The first thing you're going to notice then, it looks the same as the individual questions. So again, you've got a question, you've got a prompt, you've got your multiple choice. But the important thing this time is that it is expected that you would add a little bit of evidence for each question. And it absolutely does not need to be war and peace. Okay, so for example, if it's asking you about have you worked with all stakeholders, for example, to identify the needs, perhaps if you did this in a governors meeting, you could just literally type in see governors minutes of, let's put a date in here. Okay. It's just little things like that. You're referring to documents that you may have already created. You're not reinventing the wheel. Okay. So I'm going to talk you through a couple of these questions then. The first asks you if you can adequately describe the school. And really, this is just about contextualizing your school. So you're just stating whether you're a primary, a secondary, perhaps you're associated with a diocese, perhaps you're part of a MAT. It's any information of that ilk that would go in that first question. So the first one, just a set of 5 questions. And then we would move into leadership. Now, before I start talking you through these questions, I'm just going to explain at this point that the purpose of doing these 6 sections is that you are going to have the end result is a report that you can then show to your governing body or to your head. And it's a legal requirement that you produce this audit regularly according to legislation. Now, regularly, it's completely up to your school or your MAT to decide how to decipher that word. Okay, we would say at least once a year. Now, it is not the expectation that one person in school is going to answer all of these different sections on their own. The expectation is there might be a small team, maybe 2 or 3 of you. You can each write an answer, and then the other DP members of staff can look at what you've written, they can amend it, they can edit it until you are happy that collaboratively you have undertaken your audit and you've produced this report. Okay, so just to say that again, then each DP staff can see what each other is writing within the school questions section of your portal. So leadership, this is all concerned with policies. So it's asking you, do you have, for example, your school development plan? Has that taken into consideration the GDPR? Have you got safeguarding policies, data protection, and other types of policy that could come under the GDPR? And there's 14 questions in this section. Moving on to privacy impact assessments, this is asking you to think about risk. So have you identified within school where your biggest risk factors are? Now, quite often it's actually suppliers. So when you are thinking about working with a supplier, do you undertake a DPIA, for example, to assess the risk of working and sharing data with that supplier? And this section is just asking you what your processes within school or within your MAT are. We then come onto the school-wide support section, and this is concerned with your general staff. So on a day-to-day basis, how do you ensure that everybody within school or within the MAT group is adhering to the GDPR? What kind of processes are you putting in place to support your staff? And that's what this section of 13 questions is asking you. This next section is pretty technical, so it might well be worth making your network manager a DP staff level member, because this is all about infrastructure. So it's thinking about your servers, your internet, your communications, different procedures that are involved with that. And lastly, pretty much what it says on the tin, reviews and improvements. So as you've been doing this audit, what do you yourself think will be things that you're going to need to improve on before your next audit? Kind of where are your weak areas? Just to explain them, these questions will be completed by DP staff, and it would then be your DPO that would save and close the review. Okay, they have the final, if you like, the sign off at the very end of the product, at the end of the audit. And once you've saved all of this information, obviously you're going to want to be able to extract it. I'm just going to show you where we can find that. So if we come into reports, the report you're going to want is the all SAQ responses. And there is a further video that's purely about reports and it goes into a lot more detail, but I'll just quickly explain here. To export all of your responses, you would click on this little button here, and I can either do it by different sections or I can do the entire report, and it's going to pop it into a .csv file for me. To draw this to an end, I'm just going to take you back to the dashboard, which is the visual overview of the activity within your portal. And just going to draw your attention to this top right-hand tile. Now, this is all concerned with your internal audit. And as you can see, there's a helpful reminder of how many days you have remaining on the staff audit and the school audit. And it also shows me here how much progress I've made in answering the questions there. So if I just expand that for a sec, what we're looking at here, this is the school questions. These are the various sections, and this is just showing how many of those questions I've actually answered yet. Now this school audit, this is to do with your suppliers, this is the data mapping review, and that's just showing me how many of my products I've actually audited at the moment that I've accepted.